Hello there. I am learning to speak French. That's the thing that I'm trying to accomplish during this quarantine nonsense. I mean, I've been trying to learn this for a while, but I'm like doubling down on it now. I spoke French as a child and took French as an older child, but definitely am not fluent at this point. And it's a thing that I've kind of always wanted to do, is be fluent in another language. And moving to Ottawa has illustrated how important it is to be able to speak French. It's not exactly the way I meant it, but because like 60% of the population is bilingual here, I feel like I'm missing out on big pieces of things that are happening, especially with one of my volleyball teams. The 5 other players are predominantly French, and so sometimes our timeouts end up in French, and I don't know what's going on. So I have committed to learning French. And as I'm learning this new language and I'm trying to like remember the terms and like match them up to the pictures in my head, and like I'm thinking about all the other pieces of my life where there's language that I just don't understand. And the big one is definitely in working with other industries. Like I think in every industry, there's like a language that you have to learn basically in becoming a professional. And like that's certainly true in accounting. And I know that because I've been in accounting for a while, and because I did, well, I'm sure this would have been true if I worked in public practice, but working in industry and working only with accountants for the hours that I did to get my designation, I got really used to speaking in very technical terms. Like we didn't use the layman's terms for things. It was all the technical term because everybody that we talked to was designated or it comes from an accounting background. And so I have had to learn to translate because accounting terms and jargon and that kind of thing is not necessarily the easiest thing. I'm sure it's no harder than any industry, but unfortunately, it is a thing that small business owners need to learn at least a little bit. And today it came up where sometimes I forget how to say it in layman's terms because I'm so used to saying it in accounting. So I got an invoice today, and the lines are maybe like 13 lines or something like that. And each line had a number to 2 decimal places, and the total of all of them at the bottom, it was summed, and at the bottom it was out by decimal 0.1, which is not a big number to be out. But and the only reason I noticed is because when I was inputting it line by line into my software, the total in my software didn't match the total on the invoice. And this has happened to me before in my previous job, where when you print something, then all you can see are the numbers that you can see. So in Excel, when you're working on something in Excel and you've set it to only show to 2 decimal places, Excel actually has stored all the decimal places. And so it's rounded so that you can see only 2, but there's all of them there. So when you sum a bunch of numbers, it could be that because of all the extra decimal places that you can't see, that bottom number does not equal the total of the 2 decimal place numbers that you can actually see. And in accounting, what I would say is that doesn't foot. But if I say that to someone who's not in accounting, they're like, what do you mean? What does it mean to say that my invoice doesn't foot or my financial statements don't foot? And it means exactly what I just explained, that from what we can see, the sum of those numbers do not equal what's written as the total. And I had to then go back to the person who had given me this invoice to explain to them that in fact this is what had happened, and this is why. I know this person very well, so I explained why it had happened, but I couldn't had a hard time explaining to them because I was like, how do I say this without saying your invoice doesn't flip? And so that kind of got me on a trail of like, what else in accounting do I forget how to say in English? So I have one specifically. I don't forget how to say it, but this is a term that I wish I could say, but that it doesn't make sense to people who are not in accounting, which is ITCs. ITCs are input tax credits, and what those are on a GST HST return. It's basically the amount that you've paid out in GST on the expenses that you bought. So you like go and buy a calculator and you've got like $2 of HST. That $2 goes on your HST return as an input tax credit. You get to reduce the amount of HST that you've collected by that $2. And so I was talking to my partner about this, and it's funny that we both now, well, because he's been hanging around me for so long, he's now not sure what terms are terms that he didn't necessarily know beforehand. So I wanted to ask you, what accounting terms make no sense to you? Or what have you heard in accounting, or it could be small business in general, I can do my best on that, but accounting specifically, what accounting jargon have you heard that you don't know what it means? I would love to answer those questions for you, so leave them in the comments for me. One thing I want to express, I guess, is the debits and credits. Like, what is up with debits and credits? What are they? Debits and credits are basically the basis for the language that is accounting. So accounting to me is a language that speaks to the transactions that have happened within a company, and it's part numbers and part words and part these rules and framework and stuff like that, this set of rules. And the debits and credits are a part of that framework. So it's not a positive and a negative number, although sometimes they're illustrated as a debit is a positive and a credit is a negative, but it's not that. There are debit accounts. So debit accounts are things like assets, things that you own, things like expenses, things that you've purchased. And the credit side are liabilities, so things that you owe, equity, so the piece of the assets that the company actually owns, and revenue. And those two sides, they're two sides of the same coin, and the debits and credits need to balance in double entry bookkeeping. I'm not going to go too much more into that because it's difficult to get into that without getting into other more complicated concepts. But if you have specific questions about debits and credits, definitely leave in the comments for me. And if you have any other accounting jargon that you're like, man, I have no idea what this even means, please leave them in the comments and I will definitely define them for you. Don't feel silly or like you should just know this, because I went to school to know it. You definitely shouldn't just have been born knowing it. So let me know. I'll define those for you. I hope you're staying safe and sane, and I will see you tomorrow.